Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show planned out for you today. We had some technical issues very beginning. Again, we're still sorting these audio bugs out, but I think we got them sorted for the next little while. Um, Before I get too far into anything, I do want to remind everybody, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all of the fancy stuff. That way you get your email in the morning every day we go live, which is every day. So we have the topic today is going to be complacency, which Sean and I were just talking about. But we also have we had a couple of guests, and we were having some audio issues with them, so they'll join us very shortly. Before we get into the actual conversation, though, I do want to remind everybody that we are not doctors, and anything we do say comes from our own personal experience and should be taken with a bit of salt and to be doing your own research. If you have any questions or comments, do put them up in the comment section. We will read them and we will discuss them as we go forward. Any thoughts right off the bat there, Sean?
Yeah, just on the audio aspects of the podcast today, the issues with the guests are the guests' issues, not so much the platform's issues. So it's not that we've got any bad settings over here, we're not paying our bills, or et cetera, et cetera. It's simply the minor details of getting the guests' sound to the level that we require over here on the potty. And it's some new equipment with the guests. They're just figuring those aspects out themselves. So it's just a refining process. The next time those two guests will be on the podcast, I'm sure it will be a non factor. But every time a new guest comes in with new equipment, it's a case of we have to sort out the new problems until eventually the process starts looking after itself. So that's where we're at right now. We're in the nebulous gray area of pushing the envelope while dealing with the collateral damage of people trying to keep up with pushing the envelope.
That is the way it is. We got a comment right off the bat from 0797CJM. I am dying from burpees. That was way longer than 6 minutes.
I don't know if you that's an awesome comment from 0797 CJM because I just came out of my live chat over on Instagram and I said, look, there's only 6 minutes left until we hit the collective, and 0797 between now and then, harden up and start cracking off some burpees. But he went extra long because we didn't kick off on time. My apologies. But hey, you're welcome. Now you're tougher.
That's what I was just going to say. It was the you're
You're
welcome.
welcome.
You're welcome. Exactly. You got 15 minutes of burpees in there. Enjoy. Now, so the topic today, complacency. This is I think, a standard issue for basically 99.9% of humanity, and it needs to be talked about. It needs to be kind of developed in a certain way. So I'm going to give a definition, and then we'll get your first thoughts on it, and then hopefully Matt or Glenn will be able to join us shortly.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, the definitions that I have, this comes from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is one, self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. Or two, an instance of usually unaware or uninformed self-satisfaction. What are your first thoughts?
Well, like self satisfaction, that's rarely ever in my vocabulary. Like when I crack something out of the park, where I feel like I really like nailed something, usually what I think of it is as such. That's acceptable. I never feel satisfied with, well, I rarely ever feel satisfied. So I am a relentless pursuer of trying to make it better. The team around me, check, but myself, 100%. So I never actually feel that satisfied. I get partial satisfaction, but when I'm really like mega, I generally think of it as that's acceptable, or that's almost acceptable, or that's barely acceptable. When I'm fairly pleased, it's barely acceptable. So I never ever sit back on my haunches and think, well, now obviously I can take the rest of the year off because I did something that I'm satisfied by. So that's a word that isn't in my vocabulary too much.
Yeah. It is it can be insidious though. like it can creep up into your life pretty easily when you start to create, as we were just talking about, in creating efficiencies or creating, if you've done something so many times that it becomes a subroutine, it can, and again, I'm saying this for myself personally, it can then be a, yeah, it's good. I've already taken care of it. It's all good. I've done it before. I've done it a million times. Da, 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 da. I'm good. There's no issues with that. And one of the great examples is jujitsu. Is if you're sitting in the mats on your in your own school and you get to a point where you understand how everybody else rolls, you can kind of become complacent in your own rolling, uh, based off of the fact that you're not training with other people from outside your school that are getting new information and new styles. What do you think?
Well, I think the efficiency aspect is, and maybe how about you describe what we were just talking about
For sure.
before we hopped out of the green room? And that way, like, it's a great example of a point that I'm going to make in a few minutes. So
For
maybe
sure.
just hit us with
Yeah,
what we were just talking about.
absolutely. So we were talking about this and the fact that I create efficiencies in what I do. So let's just use this setup as an initial example. So let's say it takes me 15 minutes to get down into my studio, turn everything on, get all the programs running, have all the audio sorted out, and be waiting, good to go. So I do that for 10, 15, 20 days. I start to create efficiencies in that. And in that, maybe my mic stand is already set up and that my light is already set to the way I want it to. I have tabs already up that we're good to go and don't have any issues with. That allows me to then now take 10 minutes to get all set up. And so with those efficiencies, what I've been doing is that extra 5 minutes, I then go, oh, well, I can add a new task into that 5 minutes. And so I'll add a new task into that 5 minutes. And then my efficiencies will continue so that that 5 minute task now becomes 3 minutes and the 10 minutes becomes 8 minutes. That allows me to have another 4 minutes. So I'll add another task in there. And what happens is I eventually get to a point where the tolerances are so tight that I have a cascade failure. And one thing goes wrong, and then everything goes wrong because now it's all relied on the fact that I had, 2 seconds between this task and this task, and now that task took me 3 minutes instead of 2 minutes, and now I'm overtime, da, 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 and everything starts to fall apart. So that complacency in the fact that everything should work out the way it should, or the way I had planned it, creates a cascade failure in the long run. If that,
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so that's a great starting position to then build off of how I look at things in respect to not being complacent in the process. So, whatever process I'm in, let's say it's podcasting as an example, when I start creating efficiencies or giving myself more time to play with, I don't play on Candy Crush. What I do is I use that time to play with the process that I'm in order to make that process either more robust or take it deeper down the rabbit hole. So, as an example, my setup in here, I can switch from my Instagram live chat to the YouTube live chat in less than 60 seconds. But that's coming in hot.
mm-hmm.
If I've got 120 seconds, I'm more comfortable in coming into the live YouTube chat over here on the collective. If I've got if I've got 180 seconds, now I'm so comfortable coming into the collective that it almost feels like I'm on a bit of a vacation. If I've got 10 minutes between my live IG podcast and coming over to the collective, it's like almost an eternity. But what I don't do with those 10 minutes is start Candy Crush. What I do is focus my time on my next upcoming task, which is the collective. So maybe I'm playing with some subroutine in reference to the collective, or maybe I'm learning something real quick in reference to the collective, or maybe I'm creating some quick content that isn't like poorly thought out, but is craftily created to help support what we're going to be talking about in the collective. In other words, if I have spare time, I use that spare time to go deeper down the rabbit hole in the process that I'm engaged in at that time. Now that's the same for me out on a bike. If I'm on a bike out in the up on the single track here in Rossland, and I stop to talk to someone, if I'm going to spend any amount of time talking with them, it's not because I'm bored and I can't wait to bump into someone out in the bush so I can talk to the first person that I see. My time is valuable to me. And if it looks like I'm dogging it or wasting my time, that is not the case. I understand how much time there is left on this planet. In fact, I looked it up this morning. Generally at 60 this year, I might have another 2 decades till I'm 80. I mean, you look at the statistics, if I make it to 80, I'll be lucky. So I did 20 times 365 days. I generally know almost to the day how many more days I've got left. And I'll tell you what, it's not that many. And so every year that slips by is another year that you should better understand that you've got no time to waste. But that doesn't mean that you've got to be always like full tilt warp factor 3 creating new businesses, creating new inventions, creating new whatever. It just means that you got to use your time wisely. That means that you got to know your why.
Hmm.
Why are you in the time that you're in right now and in the near future? Not the past, but right now. What are you doing with yourself right now? And if you understand the value of time and how in the blink of an eye it's all gone, you can't afford to be complacent in your life's trajectory unless you're a slob and you don't realize that you're part of a team. And this little solo journey called Slobsville, you can be complacent all your life. But that's not the kind of people I hang out with, and that's not the kind of person I choose to be. So complacency isn't in my vocabulary because I understand the importance of creating better things out in the world for the team that is wrapped around me right now. So complacency isn't a thing. And I feel so strongly about that, that the moment that someone else is being complacent around me, well, they're going to get an earful. And it'll start from a 1 out of 10 and it'll go to an 11 out of 10 until the response is correct in order to get with the program of drop complacency and get on with the program, as it were.
Yeah, it's a great point. The the interesting thing is the fact I find I'm going to go back to this definition. I really liked it because the self satisfaction piece was never, I had never really understood that up until just recently when I pulled up this definition. I had understood the idea of, being unaware of actual dangers or deficiencies or um, being uninformed, but the concept of self satisfaction had never crystallized into what I thought complacency was. Uh, but I see it now. I can definitely see it now. It's it really is. There's a smugness to it, right? Of just
There
like, oh yeah,
is.
I got this. Yeah, I got this. No big deal.
Yeah.
It's all, I'll take care of that. Yeah, it's all good.
And what is smugness, by the way? Where does that come from?
Smugness.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. I don't 100% know, but I'm thinking right now it's probably ego.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I
Yeah.
think as well. And you know what's interesting to me, and this is not directed at you, though you can comment on your own specifics if you wish, personally. I think that when someone's ego has been at a certain state where they haven't felt validated for quite a long time, the moment that they start engaging in a process and seeing some minor success, they start feeling a little validated. All of a sudden, they can get that self satisfaction of, oh, look at me go. But the oh, look at me go part is conflated into, I'm freaking kicking ass. No, you're not, bro. You've got 2 steps across the start line. You don't even know where the finish line is. But it's a big deal to you right now because you're 2 steps over the start line, feeling large and in charge. Because when you're standing on the start line doing nothing, your ego wasn't getting validated. But the moment that you're in the game, and I mean the start of the game, an ego can go bam and get complacent because it feels self satisfied that it's in the game. But it's just barely in the game at that point. And that's where I think the danger is some, we'll call it minor success, can be conflated into, I got this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just success. Even you take 2 steps into the game and you hit a like a plateau, and okay, cool. Like you can run on that
Mm,
plateau versus
a good point.
trying to keep climbing. Right? You hit this. Oh, cool. Or even worse, you'll sit down. on that plateau and be like, we're good to go. I'm going to stay here. This is
Or
fine. I'm going
even
to.
worse, sit down on the plateau and everyone who comes walking along past you, you're going to tell them how it's done.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's that part too. That is a struggle for sure. I got a couple comments here. I just want to hit
Sure.
Satch. Good morning. Good to see you. 0797 says, you see it all too often in relationships, in my opinion. And this is a key proponent of complacency in general is that if you're talking romantic relationships, you can fall into roles very easily. You know, somebody does the laundry most of the time, somebody does the dishes most of the time, somebody cooks most of the time, and you can become very complacent in that moment of just, well, okay, dinner, my wife's making dinner, cool, right? Versus being engaged in the process of helping them with dinner or engaging the relationship portion of it as well. And then the other part of it here is we have, he says, yeah, 0797 says you can buy a lifetime calendar that shows all the months in the average lifespan. It's pretty eye opening.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. We got
Didn't you
Glenn
have one of
back.
those, buddy? Didn't you
I
have one of those calendars?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
It was Jeff Bosley had
Oh,
one in the
that's right.
background.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Let's see. We got Glenn here. Glenn, brother, how's it
How's it
going?
go? Is it sounding okay?
Sounds everything good.
Yay!
We got it to work.
Do
Bam.
not
Yeah,
do not thank me. Thank Tanya.
Tanya.
Ah, there you
Yeah,
go.
she's
Tanya.
fantastic. So let's
Sweating.
let's hit, let's hear your feelings on this. We're talking about
First of all,
Yep.
can we throw an IV into Glenn so that he can rehydrate after sweating buckets?
I don't know. Do you need an IV there, Glenn? You good?
No, tell you what, man, I wasn't being complacent in the last 10 minutes. I was trying to type and whatever at my 15 words per minute, trying to figure stuff out.
That's awesome. So let's re-engage you into the conversation of complacency. So at the beginning, I read a definition. I'm going to read a definition to you again, and you can give us your thoughts on it right off the bat. So it says complacency, number one, self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. And two, an instance of usually unaware or uninformed self-satisfaction. What are your thoughts on complacency, brother?
Oh man, what comes to mind real quick is something that was in building the elite, that that slow creep of complacency. It was I've where it's that's the one that really comes to mind. And when you start to get comfortable and you do your best to prevent complacency, so you double check your gear, all that kind of stuff, and you keep on doing that, but nothing ever happens where you actually have to double check your gear. I think that's where it kind of gets slippery.
Mm.
And also, when that's kind of on the individual, but when there's a team, that gets that gets a little bit tricky too. I think when I guess when you kind of want to fit in and all that kind of stuff, and everyone else doesn't double check their gear or something like that, where it's like, hey, why do you have all these batteries? Why are you carrying all this extra gear? It's like, well, just in case, you know. So
Yeah, just in case is a great one. Steve Ferry was talking about that when he was on last time about his fire truck and making sure he has all the right checks and making sure he has all the right gear and
mhm.
making sure he double checks everything and basically created the culture of double checking and triple checking and making sure that everything was solid regardless because complacency it can be a slow creep.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm. Thoughts, Sean?
Yeah, the idea of I think everyone needs a chief compliance officer in every moment. I do. I really do. Because the standard, if it's not maintaining itself, then someone has to maintain the standard. And the standard is show up good to go and ensure all of those around you are good to go if you're on a
Mhm.
team. And so the how you do one thing is how you do a thousand things, as the old saying
Mhm.
goes. And if you're squared away and you run your life squared away, then everything is squared away. And when you start interacting with a team, if you show up like a gong show and no one corrects you, then that is the team letting the standard backslide, turning a blind eye to not meeting the standard. That is complacency. And that can happen pretty quickly in a
Mhm.
team that doesn't hold itself accountable. The complacency can then become the culture. But that's never the case if there's a strong compliance officer. So who's the compliance officer? Well, it might be the team leader, but more correctly, it's you, it's us, it's me doing my job to the best of my ability, leadership by example within that team setting, and everyone understanding that that is the standard at a bare minimum to meet. And then I'm hoping that the team members all around me are driving that standard higher so that I'm pursuing a higher standard myself. The complacency will creep into any culture and to any institution if there is no chief compliance officer at whatever level within the organization.
I do like the fact that it's kind of similar to you are your own first responder,
Hmm.
right? You are your own. We just came back from a camping trip, and while we were chatting, um, my wife and I were kind of chatting. We were actually watching. This is something I wanted to touch on as well. There were a number of forest fires going on while we were camping in the area that we were in, and I watched for 4 days while we were out there. The fire teams just absolutely kick ass all day long. Choppers, float planes, but like all kinds of things hitting, trying to take the water to the burn. The best part about it was watching them work all day, sun up, sun down. Right, there was no break in it. The boys got a little annoyed by it, but I was like, no, we can't. They can't stop to check. They can't go, oh, okay, well, let's take 20 minutes and see if it keeps burning. No, they have to keep putting water on it to make sure that it's out, to make sure that it's out. And while that was happening, this is a kind of a side note, but while it was happening, the boys heard one of the other campers next to us. And they were all like, ooh, it's a bear. Let's go take a look. And I was like, what? And it made me realize in that instant that I had not actually sat them down and talked to them about wildlife safety or wildlife, like any sort of knowledge on what to do with wildlife in the area. That I hadn't actually made that conversation happen at any point in time. And so, had that actually been a bear, and had they actually gone like, "Ooh, I want to go see what it's like," that could have turned out horribly. Luckily, it was just another camper who was making a lot of noise, so turned out beneficial, not beneficial, but not negative. But it was a very complacent moment that clicked in my head and was like, "Hey, we need to have a conversation about this," and so we did. Sometimes you got to get punched in the face. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's got to hit you hard enough to realize that you screwed up and you screwed up real hard. If that makes any sense. What
Well,
do you
it
guys think?
does, but the question is, or the question remains, at what point did you become complacent? Because I believe, even in basic training, irrespective of your trade, whether it's combat engineer or infantry or whatever the case is, at some point as young soldiers, we are taught a process that doesn't allow for complacency. And let me give you a good example. When I was on Vancouver Island for Operation Pegasus Jump, I went up to do some caving with Seb and his girl Alex. And when we got out of the vehicle, before we even took a step towards the cave, which was about a 10-minute walk, Seb said, okay, we're going to do a briefing. And he broke out his little notepad and started checking off some boxes of if this happens, if that happens, if we get separated, if injury, if this, here's my spare batteries, they're in this pocket, and etc. Just like every freaking briefing I've ever given a million times in the past. And so Seb could do that, enter into almost like a special operations briefing just for a simple caving thing. That rarely happens out in the regular world or out in the civilian world, I'll say. I mean, I used to do it way back in the day when I got out of the teams. If I had someone if I was going out with them, I'd give them a briefing. If we get separated, if this, then that. I mean, that's what I was taught. But eventually, I stopped doing them because people just ain't used to them. It's weird. They don't like it. It takes up too much time to talk about if you get injured. Let's just go get injured. And then hopefully we can figure it out on the fly. That's kind of how it works out in the, we'll call it regular world. And so at some point, I stopped giving briefings to other people other than, like obvious requirements or if you keep doing what you're doing, pal, you're going to cut your silly head off with those helicopter blades. So come on over here so I can explain to you how helicopters work, you nerd. And so, if not for that, I never really started, or I never continued briefing, we'll call it, civilians out on how to do things properly because they just ain't used to it and they'd roll their eyes once it started happening. But within my own family, like I could pull them in front of the microphone and they'd nod their heads. It doesn't matter if we were, when the boys were younger, up until just recently, if we're walking through a place, I'd say, okay, that's the ORV, or that's where we're going to meet if we get separated. If you get separated, don't keep walking around looking for us. Come straight to this spot and hold. That's the patrol base. And so all of the standard issue immediate action drills, if this, then that, my family knows how to do those things. When we're traveling overseas in an airport, when we get into an airport, that's the rendezvous point if we get separated. And then we keep on proceeding forward to the next spot. That's the new rendezvous point. We keep on proceeding. Yeah, we've got phones. Yeah, we've got all kinds of things to connect with each other. Guess what? Things go sideways and you need to act accordingly as if you're running a, to some degree, military operation, I feel. So the complacency sets in the moment that you stop doing your job for the team and the team stops observing how the job is done properly, I feel.
Yeah. Glenn?
Could I add something to that actually? Um, you know, listen to you guys talk is always thought provoking. So I always bring it back to the first 2 minutes of a conversation. But what that made me think of in terms of complacency, it's something I think about daily. To be honest with you, before every single time I go out to go to work, and I would hate to not be ready if my teammates or if my sergeant needed me to do something. That is the number one thing that I think about in terms of complacency. So for me, there's at my level, there's not much I bring to the table except showing up on time, having a good attitude, and having all my gear sorted out and get ready to go. I think I'm not sure if I sent the letter to you, Chance, but I sent it to Sean, and that was one of the things that was highlighted was that, you know, always early, always turned out well groomed, and always gear is all ready to go for all the situations. And that is the low hanging fruit that's someone at an entry level can bring to the table. And why not do that to the best of your ability?
Yeah.
Well, there's something important in that in respect to the team, and that is whichever individual is noting those things and recording them as part of your career report, for lack of a better term, while they're writing that, they're considering it within the context of the institution or the organization. And if you're being called out for going the extra mile, for lack of a better term, the individual who's writing that is thinking, oh, that's the extra mile in context of what normally happens out there. And they're now contextualizing or calibrating why it's important. And maybe they're also going to consider how can I encourage others to show up just a couple minutes early with all their gear squared away and the extra batteries and all the good stuff. Because what you're doing at a base level or at the, we'll call it the bottom of the totem pole, you're demonstrating the standards of what should be at the top of the totem pole. But that isn't the case usually. And so for someone to call you out on what I consider to be the standard, well, that should have someone thinking further up the chain how to maybe increase the standard, as it were, for the rest of the organization.
I think one of the major difficulties for this, in terms of complacency and the everyday citizen, for lack of a better term, is the fact that we're comfortable. The likelihood of major issues happening, likelihood of an injury happening, are low, and so just due to the fact that it's rare that these things happen, the mindset of it will never happen to me becomes prevalent, let's say. And I know for a lot of the outside of the military, you were saying that giving briefings to people, it's weird. The reason it's weird for the average person is because they've never had to actually contemplate their own mortality or risk of injury. They've never done it before. So when you say, "Hey, my first aid kit is here. It's in my truck. It's on the left side door, passenger. Give her." if anything happens. For the average person, they're like, why would I need to know that? I had an instance where I was in school and they did a they did an active shooter drill, and they did a whole the school app went off and everyone was like, oh my god, what do we do? And the instructors were like, well, it's just a drill, so we're just gonna carry on and keep going. And the all the lights in my head were going off of just like, what? But it, like, if this actually happens, you need to be ready. Like, this can't be the response to an actual to a drill. But that's was the fact, was they were so complacent in the fact that it will never happen here, that we're not even going to practice it.
Hmm.
And that large scale concept filters down into all of the little things of, I don't need to know how to defend myself because I'll call the police. I don't need to know how to use firearms because they shouldn't even be here, right? It be it starts to lead into a mindset of bad things shouldn't happen, therefore they won't. What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's not so much that bad things shouldn't happen. I think it's more like bad things don't happen. And so, if you're really comfortable in your basement podcasting, and then you step out into a bigger world and things start happening and you're not managing it very well, the chaos of the moment, we'll call it. Well, that's because your safe little world is safe, and you're not thinking about the things that can go wrong because you're not experiencing those wrong things, or you haven't experienced them for a while. So you haven't considered the pattern of how things can go wrong. You're just comfortable being comfortable. And the moment that you step out of your uncomfortable, or step out into the uncomfortable, it's a new world. It's an uncomfortable world that you haven't given much consideration because you've been so freaking comfortable. So let me throw this at you. I feel that a large part of it is because people just don't see the patterns in life. If you spend all your life in your basement, the only pattern you know is your basement. But if you travel all around the world in all of the chaos of the world, you start forming different patterns of how the world actually works. So for you, Chance, is the example. When you're sitting in that campsite and you heard a bear, or someone heard a bear, and you thought, ooh, I better brief the boys on the bear. That should never have been your first thought. What your first thought should have been, wow, fires. Fires displace wildlife. I've been in the bush before. I know that wildlife displaced is anxious and doesn't act accordingly. And so now it's an abnormal situation forcing wildlife towards my general location. That should have been the pattern that you recognized the moment that you saw those fires, but you didn't. You only came to the idea of, ooh, I better tell the boys that it's not good to be eaten by a bear the moment that you heard a quasi bear 10 feet from your campsite. That is not the time to see these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
The time to see the pattern is by patternizing life and actively trying to form patterns, not letting them fall on top of our laps by happenstance. We have to actively engage in creating a patternized view of the world so that when that noise occurs, it isn't a surprise because you've already got a game plan in place. What do you think?
I 100% agree with you, and it definitely it threw my entire concept of what we were doing camping for a bit of a loop. And that conversation did come up afterwards. But my first thought was the fact that I had wholly unprepared my boys for being in the bush, in the expectation that I was capable. That makes sense. Like, I know
It
what to
does.
do. I know what needs to happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, if something does happen, I can engage it without the realization that I won't always be there. And that's where I got stuck on the complacent part of it, is the fact that I have skills. Okay, I can manage situations. Great. But just the fact that I was leaning on those skills to take care of the team created a complacent environment. And you're right, though, that the fact that the fires would um, displace animals came up later in the conversation, but it wasn't my first thought, and it should have been. Glenn, what are your thoughts?
I was kind of thinking about Sean's example about the podcaster in the basement and just not really experiencing much, and it made me think that complacency is potentially a bit more common these days, and it's also relative, right? Like, you know, being in a safe world in your basement and you're being complacent, there's no direct consequence to it.
Mm.
And then, you do something else and like, you know, you can get away with it because there's no direct consequence to it. And then all of a sudden you hit this threshold, which is going to be max, and you're out in the street and you're complacent. And guess what? You have no idea what to do because you haven't put yourself in any of those positions where complacency is actually a thing. And if you're not prepared, it's going to be a direct consequence that might be difficult to come back from.
Mm. Do you think that there are points and times where we need those? Because Sean, is we've said this before on the show, is sometimes you got to get you got to get lost, and then you got to realize that you're lost. Then you got to sit down and have a cry, and then you're gonna have to figure out how to manage that situation. Do you think that there's a point in time that those, for lack of a better term, get punched in the face by life?
You know, uh, yeah. I mean, all how do I say this? I'll be honest with you. Having this extended course, there are many points that I've been kind of getting a little bit fatigued, and uh, I've done something small where it set off alarms in my own head that, like, whoa, dude, hey, you're getting complacent here a little bit. And I think, the more prepared you are, the sooner those alarm bells go off before you get to the point where if you kind of ignore it, then it's going to be a big issue.
Mm.
So example for me is like, you know what, I wasn't stretching as much, uh, being in the course for what, 7 months now, versus I would have been out of the course 3 months ago. So my body's just getting fatigued. It's like, you know what, I'm just gonna relax a little bit more. So what happened the next day? Whoa, I'm a bit more stiff. I'm not as agile out there where I need to be, where I can be a good teammate, where I can legitimately have my squads as six, actually, not just have the shirt.
Hmm.
Um, and that set off some alarm bells in my brain. It's like, hey, you know what, dude? Even though you're tired, you need to just even get that extra 10 minutes of stretching in to get your hips ready to go so you can get out and run and do all this stuff and be good to go for a full 12 hours and be there for your squad.
Mm. Yeah, Sean, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pass on comments because I got too much noise going on in the kitchen, so I'll let you continue.
Right. Um, Glenn, you got anything else? I got a couple comments here I wanted to hit.
No, yeah, go for it, brother.
Okay. So we got 0797. I recently applied for the CAF. This information is gold. Thank you guys. I want to go in as the best version of myself. Awesome. And absolutely, we will continue to be doing these. So continue listening. That's the way to go. Tanya says, people think anxiety is inherently a bad thing. It can get out of control, but we evolved this trait to keep us safe. It needs tempering with practice and protocols. Hmm. What do you think, Glenn?
Yeah, I think that's bang on. Actually, there's nothing more I can add to that.
Go. Tanya's got the mic drop from outside the mic. Sean, you got anything?
Yeah, I do. I think that that is a great comment. However, it needs tempering with practice and protocols, though. Okay, cool point. But then what? How does that magically happen? Who's magically putting that in place? The individual who doesn't understand that it requires practice and protocol? Because they ain't doing it, so they don't know how to do it. And so I feel that it needs tempering with practice and protocol as enforced by a chief compliance officer until the individual actually becomes actualized to then put the practice and protocols in place as a subroutine that doesn't require constant reinforcement by them or by anyone external to them. And so I feel that there is a requirement for practice and protocols. That was called basic training and an entire military career for me. But then I kept on keeping on. I didn't kick it back, put my feet up, and forget that it requires practice and protocols to drive a driven life. So I think that some people do forget that. And then someone's got to step in and chief compliance officer that thing all day long until someone shakes their head and gets with the program. And so it does need to be tempered with practice and protocol, as enforced by someone who's going to crack that freaking whip until someone gets with the program and then can be autonomous, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the role of the instructor, the professor, the mentor, the the ideal, right? That's the what you're striving for. That keeps you continually practicing in these protocols. And you know, you said that you got out of the military and you kept living this life, and I did not. Right? I got out of the army and I put my feet up. I 100% did, and I was like, well, I guess I'm good to go. Cool. I'll just live this life and try to manage. But it hasn't been until starting jujitsu and getting my my food intake sorted out, my sleep sorted out, and all these little protocols that has led me to a point that again I started to get complacent because I was like, oh, okay, well, I got this. I got this, no problem. I was sitting on the plateau telling everybody else how to do things, and I got called out by you, by Satch, by other people who said you can't just talk about it. You got to live it. And so I re-engaged it. Uh, so there's examples of this throughout life, but you can actually see it on the collective. If you go back to day one to now, you can see all those points where I kind of got complacent. I allowed things to slip, and then I got the chief compliancy officer came along and was like, "Sort yourself out," right? So it does happen, and it's not a bad thing that it happens. It's actually a good thing when somebody comes up and says, "You need to sort yourself out," because they're seeing it from a detached point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the key point with the chief compliancy officer is seeing it detached. Whereas when you're in it, everything seems like it's cool. Everything seems to be working. You don't see the issue until the issue is put in your face or it all goes sideways. What do you guys think?
Well, I think with that, I think it's. Uh, I'm guessing the chief compliance officer here is going to be Sean.
It definitely was.
and and what's awesome about that whole thing, Chance and Sean, is that Sean was able to communicate that with you, and you were able to take that information and do something about it,
Mm,
which is great because I think there's a lot of situations where there are not even in a work setting or just like a friend setting. You see your friend being complacent, and you verbalize to them, "Hey, what's going on, buddy? You're kind of let yourself slide a little bit." And I think that nowadays people will tend to take that as like get defensive and not receive that information and just you know expedite that sliding process at a steeper angle. It's
Yeah,
like
double
whatever.
down.
Yeah, fine. Watch this slide.
You can't tell me I'm sliding. I'm going to double slide.
Yeah. It's like, well, that didn't work out well.
yeah. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's become quite commonplace for individuals to sort of kick back and not try too hard anymore. Because maybe they don't know the why of their existence. Maybe they just haven't thought about what they want to accomplish with this brief moment that we have, this spark of life. And so I think that a large part of it comes down to, were you put on this planet to lay on a couch, or were you put on this planet to become something more than just lay on the couch? And laying on the couch is pretty comfortable, and day after day, year after year, then it feels right. It feels like, this is what I do every day is I lay on a couch. I'm crushing it laying on a couch. But until you kind of hang out with people who don't operate on a couch, who are out there doing much greater things. And I mean, I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about mega inspiring people who become doctors, astronauts, and SEAL team members all in one. Johnny, largely
Johnny
in
Kim.
charge, Johnny
Yeah.
Kim. And so, I mean, what is possible as a human? Well, I'll tell you what's possible. What we tell ourselves is possible, and then actioning against it. I've said it just recently. I've started to own this freaky little freak train called podcasting. If I'm gonna do it, freaking get out of my way. I'm gonna do it hard. I'm gonna go all in. I'm going to inspire people by how hard I go on it. And so I think our job is less about don't be complacent. I think it's more about push the envelope so others can get out of their complacency. I mean, if I just dial my complacency from complacent up to pretty mediocre, who is that inspiring? And by the way, I feel like I'm an underperformer in mediocrity, and that cognitive dissonance of feeling like I'm kind of in the game, but I'm really not in the game. That's no place to live. I mean, you've got to feel like you're in the game. You've got to feel like you're changing the game to really be alive in the game. And so complacency doesn't work for me at all. So much so that part of my role now is to try to inspire others to get out of their complacency by demonstrating that you can really push a pace and not implode or not disappear into a parallel universe, as it were.
Yeah. I think there's something important to be said about pushing the pace and imploding. Right. I think there's a point in time where you have to push your pace to a point that everything falls apart, and then you got to figure out what to do from there. Because if you never really hit a point, you've never hit that limit, if you never hit that wall that you physically had never touched or mentally had never gotten to, you'll never know it's there. And once you know it's there, then you can crush it. Then you can push past it. Then you can drive beyond it. But it does. If you're only ever running your car at like 3,000 RPM and you never hit that red line, you never know that that's possible. Let alone what can be done at the red line. So I think that's important.
Yeah, we say it over here pretty regularly that you have to form your extremes. You have to
Mhm.
understand your boundaries. You have to understand your area of operation. You have to understand your battle space. You have to understand your arcs of fire. You have to understand the full left and the full right so that you know what your bandwidth is that you're operating within. If you've got a mega tight bandwidth like that you're operating within, and you think that that's a mega life, well, this is a way bigger life. The moment that you start expanding your bandwidth, it gives you the ability in the real time to interact with the situation and those around you in a much more capable manner. If you're on the if you're a thread, your bandwidth is a thread. You only have really such a narrow window of opportunity that you're a one-dimensional person. But the moment that you start expanding your abilities to your full left and full right of arcs, now you've got room to play. Now you've got many options. And by the way, while you're displaying those many options on the circumstance that you're facing and those around you who are observing, well, what you're doing is you're demonstrating all the ways that it can be done by simply being cool and calm in the chaos and looking at someone and saying, "Get over here, you dummy. I'm going to sort this out." So I think that it's mandatory not only to get out of complacency, more correctly, it's mandatory to start displaying how much awesomeness is available to anyone once they start trying to truly see their limits of, we'll call it exploitation.
Yeah. Glenn, thoughts?
Yeah, could I add something to that? Um, Sean mentioned something a little bit earlier about in terms of complacency. Speaking like you're already good enough, and it's not a complete collective podcast without someone talking about Bruce Lee or Musashi. so,
Bam.
so let's do it here, and that made me think about a Musashi quote where I'm gonna just paraphrase it here, so bear with how this is gonna be a bit of a dumpster fire. But uh, be careful of the words you speak, for the warrior of within will start to believe it. I think that also goes both ways. If you speak poorly of yourself, yeah, you're gonna start to believe it. And also on the extreme other end, if you believe, oh, I'm squared away, I'm good to go, entering the complacency world, that person's gonna believe it too. And then all of a sudden, hey, there's that creep of you're actually not good to go. You're not squared away at all, and it's gonna be you're compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, you got any other thoughts? I got a couple comments here.
I'll hit the comments, buddy.
Okay. I do want to start this off with a quote from Henry Ford, actually. And he said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And I think it goes very much into this that if it really depends on what you believe you're capable of. So Tanya says, doing threat analyses for my week and noticing problematic trends plus addressing those has changed the way I lived. Proactive versus reactive. And that is an excellent point for sure. Any thoughts on that before I carry on?
Well, the two things tie together in to some regard in your Henry Ford quote of irrespective of what you believe, that's your reality. And so, moving into Tanya's situation, whether it's proactive versus reactive, that's all on us. We get to choose, but first, before you choose, you have to think about why you're choosing, what you're choosing. You have to be intentional with your now, with your moment, with your day, and what the expectations of yourself are. So, if you believe that you can be proactive and you engage in that proactivity, well, now it's real. But none of it occurs, none of this has meaning if you're just bumbling through life without any intentional thought and any practice consideration of why you're here and why are you doing what you're doing. So I feel that without much intentional consideration of the now or of your existence or of your why, well, you're full reactive. You're simply getting bounced around like a pinball in a pinball machine without knowing the rule set, without knowing what the outcome expectations are. You're a victim mentality within the victimized world that is chaotic and uncontrollable because you don't know how to apply against that problem by intentionally applying some energy, some consideration to being more proactive and shaping the world around you rather than letting the world shape you.
Yeah. Glenn, any thoughts?
No, none, man. Awesome. Just
Awesome.
awesome.
Carrying on with some comments here. 0797 says, I find it most common in individuals who are born here versus someone who migrated here for a better life. Even being homeless to some of them is miles ahead of what they experience. That's very true. You know, we have it really, really, really good in North America. We really do. And we forget how good we have it on a regular basis. And it takes
Well,
sometimes. So go
yeah,
ahead.
forget. Yeah, you've had, I think, well, I'll speak for myself. I've had the luxury of traveling and seeing most of the, well, huge chunks of the world, I'll say, 40 countries now, 40 plus. And I've seen the lowest of the low, the highest of the highs. And so that's good context in respect to understanding how lucky we are over here in North America. But to the other point, which is I was not born here. I was born in Yorkshire, England, at a time that it was extremely a poor country. And my family, we were extremely poor, had no, we didn't have two pennies to rub together. So when we emigrated over here to Canada, it was really the land of milk and honey to some degree. It was a much better way of life than the life that I was born into as a young child, and so I think it's not just the uh, youthful life that you've lived; it's also how much you've explored the world around you. You don't have to travel out of your own city to understand homelessness. You don't have to travel out of your own city to understand crime. It's what you look for, how you try to explore the world around you, whether you want to put horse blinders on, walk straight to the Starbucks, get a latte, walk straight to your cubicle, do your cubicle work, walk straight past Starbucks, grab a little smoothie, straight to your car, and straight home. That is not living a full life. That is living a horse blinder life that never interacts with the world around you and never starts forming the patterns of the greater world around us. And I feel that a lot of individuals nowadays are insulating themselves from the broader world around them, insulating themselves from homelessness and crime because they don't want to deal with the broader world around them. And without dealing with it, you don't have the patterns or you don't have the ability to deal with that greater world around you when it shows up right in front of your face and says, now you're going to get it. Now you're going to see a world that you've been trying to ignore for some time, wholly unprepared for the moment.
Yeah. Glenn, any thoughts?
No, nope. Just I can't on that. I can't add anything to that one. So
It is true, and interesting point you made there, Sean, was the fact that when life comes back to you after you've been leading that blindered life, and life comes to you, you are wholly unprepared for it, like across the board. And if you can, it also can lead you to a very. You brought up a good point in terms of living a blindered life. It can lead you to believe that life is hard, right? And that is a really bad place to be if you think that, having to wake up and go to Starbucks and go to work and then go back to Starbucks and then come home is a hard life. Yeah, I didn't really like. I had a general understanding of poverty before I went to Afghanistan, but you go to Afghanistan, you learn a whole new world, a whole new understanding of what poverty is, and it is a eye opening spot to be in. But I would, even seeing pictures or watching a National Geographic documentary on how certain areas in Africa are poverty stricken, until you're physically there, watching someone build a wall with mud all day long in the blistering hot sun because they have to build that wall so that they can get water to their crops. That is it's a mind altering position to be in.
Yeah, but
I
what
got
people don't alter their minds on, you as the observer of that moment, and you were a casual observer, not an active
yeah
observer in the sense, maybe in passing by. But what the connection that isn't often made in that moment is, though you're seeing poverty or hardship, they may be happier, slash,
absolutely
in brackets,
yes
are probably way happier than Chance
yes
Burrow's end bracket in that moment, because the life that their simple life of task oriented survival and producing for their family. Chance Burrows stopped doing that a long time ago because he got comfortable on a couch, or Sean Taylor got poor at looking after the people around him because he got focused on dot dot dot. Glenn forgot how to blah 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 because of dot dot dot. I mean, we're all victim to comfort. We're all
yeah
victim to complacency. And in that moment for you, Chance, where you got to see that mud wall being built, you get to think, that poor guy, or you get to think, man, look at how happy that guy is. It's how we contextualize the moment,
mm-hmm.
and being singularly focused on, wow, poverty sucks. That's a not even, it's not doing it the right justice that is
yeah
required for the moment. Really observing what's going on, really forming the importance of the moment and gaining a lesson from it for ourselves, not just simply noting it and carrying on, as it were.
yeah I One of the things that I've always held with me, at least, was how happy all the kids were. That was a big thing wandering around Afghanistan. Was the kids were always smiling, they're always laughing, they're always making jokes, they're always having a blast. And there was a point in my head where I was like, how, why? And it struck me, very similar to what you said there, is the fact that that's their life. They're living a happy life because they want to be happy, because they're enjoying it. And when we give them a pen and that makes their day, outstanding, right? And again, it showed me um, how complacent I was in my ability to enjoy my life. And that is
Yeah,
that's a
and
struggle we all have.
contextualize that against North American kids at Christmas,
Yeah.
when they're some of the most unhappy kids on the planet when their Xbox is white instead of black. I wanted the
But I
black
wanted the
one.
special edition.
I wanted the one with Transformers on it. I mean, the unhappiest kids on the planet are Christmas Day in North America for a large swath of our continent because they didn't get the special, special, special.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, there's kids on the other side of the planet who are a day away from starve and die, and they're an order of magnitude happier.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Um, I got a couple more comments here, and then we'll do some final thoughts, and we'll carry on. So 0797 says, the spark of life. I love that. I'm 26 and I feel like you're talking directly to me. That's why I'm joining the CAF. I need to surround myself with men like you. I have my own drill sergeant in my head. It's a good one to have. And then he finishes off with the great Marvin Hagler would train in a shack in the freezing cold for that very reason. He said it's easy to sleep in when you're laying in silk sheets.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Any final thoughts, Glenn, on anything we've talked about so far?
Number one, it's good to see you guys again, man.
Good
Uh,
to see you,
Good
buddy.
to see you, brother.
number two, I was trying to think, how can I what's a way I can simplify complacency so it applies to everybody? And the one thing I see across the board is health. A lot of people wait till the end of the line to work on their health, be complacent with their health. It's like, why should I be healthy, eat well, take the right vitamins, sleep well? I'll wait till I'm on my deathbed or have terminal cancer until I can start to work on it. So I think start to work on all that stuff now, and you'll be happier doing it.
Yeah, 100%. Sean?
Well, I think complacency comes down to this. If you're comfortable right now, you're complacent. Period.
Yeah. Yeah. There there's a thing that I got told a long time ago that it didn't click into my head until just recently, and that is that you can enjoy life through difficulties. Enjoyment in life does not just come from enjoyable moments. Enjoyment of life comes from enjoying living. And a big portion of that comes from dealing with the struggles that you have to deal with. And if you live a life of zero struggles, that is a really horrible life. And I can't even imagine how bored life would be, or how boring life would be, if you didn't have to struggle through anything. That'd be a really rough life.
Oh, hang
So,
on a sec. I can't
okay,
let that one go without
yep,
adding a
okay.
disclaimer.
Disclaimer.
Because there's a guy somewhere in the world right now, actually in North America, probably in your city, that is laying on a couch right now facing the adversity of his remote control for Netflix batteries. Just died. And now his adversity is trying to find some new batteries. Well, that's not the kind of life that anyone should live. Adversity in the moment, based on being overly comfortable, takes more than climbing off the couch to find a set of spare batteries. You got to think bigger than that. You got to
Yes.
go face real adversity. You got to get real uncomfortable, not just a little uncomfortable. You got to get a whole lot of uncomfort in your life if your life is based on a couch. And the moment that you get off the couch and start pursuing ferociously some adversity, you'll be able to look back in time and think, what in the heck was I thinking when I thought finding batteries was hard?
That is the key thing. Well, for those watching, make sure you put it in the comments. How are you being complacent right now? And what are you doing to get out of that complacency? So hit us up in the comments. We do read them all. Make sure that you toss it in there, because we all want to learn more. We all want to learn more about ourselves. We all learn more about others. We want to learn how to better the team every day. And by doing that, it allows us to build each other up. And then we can all grow into the collective that we should be. And you can do that with us here on the collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.